Currently, China is said to be preparing for a post-Putin Russia. China is increasing its relations with mid-level Russian government officials. Let's take a closer look at this today. Let's take a look right away. According to a report by the Wall Street Journal, China does not see Russia as just an immediate partner for cooperation, but is acting with a strategic relationship in mind that will last for decades to come. China, believing the current power structure won't last, isn't just relying on President Putin, but is broadening its ties across the Russian political sphere. They are forming ties with mid-level officials in diplomacy, the economy, and administration, plus emerging political elites to ensure China's influence endures through regime changes or power shifts. This is seen as an attempt to build a lasting network so China can keep influencing Russia's policies even if leadership changes. There is an even more noteworthy aspect. Reports suggest China's intelligence agencies may be seeking to strengthen ties with mid-level Russian officials by offering incentives or limiting economic support and business opportunities. For China, it's important to grasp the atmosphere inside the Russian government and the policy-making process faster than anyone else, so they are putting considerable effort into securing a wide range of personal connections. Russian intelligence agencies are aware of these moves and remain on guard, but due to the Kremlin's desire to avoid straining relations with China, they are very cautious about raising public concerns. There is also analysis that Russia, as it is currently heavily dependent on China's economic support and trade, is aware that directly criticizing China could lead to diplomatic and economic burdens. This situation is being seen as an example of the complex reality where, while emphasizing close cooperation on the surface, both sides are actually wary of each other behind the scenes. This phenomenon has occurred mainly because of the situations that Russia and China each face. For Russia, China is nothing short of a lifeline. As I will explain later, a significant part of Russia's economy is already dependent on China. For example, China currently accounts for about 40% of Russia's foreign trade. The figure, which was 10% in 2013, has risen to 40% in just about 10 years. This is because, as you know, Russia faces sanctions from all sides due to the war in Ukraine, leaving China as its only trading partner. Currently, China is purchasing Russian oil and natural gas at near bargain prices, while Russia struggles to export energy without access to the Chinese market. For Russia, China is now essentially a lifeline. The Wall Street Journal noted that China, the balance of power in their relationship has effectively shifted to China. For example, President Putin of Russia visited China last May, hoping to finalize a contract for the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline. This would let Russia export more natural gas to China, but China wanted a very low price, like Russia's domestic rate, so they couldn't reach a deal. But Russia is left in a difficult position because China has no reason to rush. On the contrary, as Ukraine attacked oil refineries across Russia, there was even a fuel shortage within Russia. China is even taking the lead in Central Asia, which used to be Russia's backyard. The Wall Street Journal reported that as China grows its yuan-based financial network and develops projects in Central Asia, Russia is now much more passive than before. Russia has been cautious about China's rising influence in Central Asia and has resisted the yuan-based operation of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Development Bank. However, as Western sanctions increased Russia's financial isolation, the country has moved toward accepting this. Alexander Gabuev, director of the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center, said China is waiting for the Russian economy to worsen and be brought to its knees. That's because the worse the Russian economy gets, the more favorable terms China can negotiate. Ongoing assessments show that since the war in Ukraine, Russia's economy is becoming increasingly dependent on China. Western companies left Russia, and Chinese firms quickly replaced them without opposition. For example, Chinese companies now hold a 57.2% share of the Russian automobile market. Their market share, which was 9% in 2022, has risen to 57.2% in 2026. Not only that, but in the Russian smartphone market, Samsung and Apple used to be number 1 and 2, but now Chinese company Xiaomi has taken the top spot. In addition, in Siberia and the Far East regions of Russia, there have been noticeable changes in recent years. A prime example is the rapid increase in the use of the Chinese language. In cities near the border, such as Vladivostok and Blagoveshchensk, you can easily find Chinese written not only on store signs, restaurant menus, and shop notices, but even on some traffic signs. Photos taken by locals have become a trending topic online. In some areas, people are even saying that the Chinese writing catches your eye before the Russian does. Many analysts say these changes can't be explained solely by the rise in tourists. Chinese capital is steadily entering distribution, logistics, lodging, and wholesale and retail markets, quickly expanding services for Chinese people. Demographics are also contributing to these changes. The Russian Far East has been experiencing a population decline for a long time. Due to high living costs, a lack of jobs, and harsh climate, many Russians are moving to western regions like Moscow or St. Petersburg. On the other hand, along the border with China, Chinese people arriving for trade, investment, and business opportunities are becoming increasingly active. With the opening of roads and railway bridges connecting the border, the movement of people and goods has become much easier than before, and the presence of Chinese companies and merchants in the local economy is also growing. As this trend continues, both economic activities and the look of commercial districts and the local environment are gradually changing. Currently, some analysts say that what China considers most important is not President Putin himself, but Russia after Putin, and as a Russian, no matter how long a leader stays in power, that power will eventually have to change hands. Above all, President Putin's power is being greatly shaken by the current war in Ukraine. If this happens, it's hard to say that the collapse of the Putin regime is impossible. If the Putin regime does collapse, Russia's foreign and economic policies could change significantly in the process. China isn't leaving these changes to chance, but is taking a proactive approach. This is also why they are trying to expand their contacts with next-generation politicians, bureaucrats, local government officials, people in the economic sector, and other figures who may hold greater power in the future. It is believed there is a strategy to ensure friendly ties with China are maintained, even if a new power arises. In particular, Russia is a country where the possibility is constantly raised that various political forces may expand their influence during the power succession process. It is reported that China believes it is much more stable to maintain relationships with several figures at the same time rather than concentrating all diplomatic assets on a single individual. This secures connections early, allowing immediate cooperation with new leadership if there's a future power shift or succession competition. This kind of long-term strategy is considered one of the characteristics of Chinese diplomacy. There is also an assessment that China's perspective on Russia is quite long-term, as they are more focused on future changes in the power landscape than on the immediate outcomes of the current summit. The Wall Street Journal analyzes that these moves are a strategic maneuver that goes beyond the current close relationship and takes into account the period after Putin. Above all, China does not trust Russia. On the surface, it may look like China and Russia are closely cooperating to keep the United States in check, but there is a steady analysis that, in reality, their relationship is far from one of complete trust. The two countries actively cooperate in areas where their interests align, but when it comes to issues involving their own influence, they have always shown a willingness to compete. A prime example of this is North Korea. Recently, as military cooperation between Russia and North Korea has rapidly expanded, China is also reportedly watching this closely. China has long seen North Korea as within its core sphere of influence, but expanding Russia-North Korea military and technological ties could weaken China's hold over Pyongyang. The Wall Street Journal reported that President Putin attempted to set up a Russia-China-North Korea summit, but China declined. The same applies to Central Asia. China expands economic influence there with its Belt and Road Initiative, while Russia has traditionally seen the region as its sphere of influence. While the two countries aren't openly clashing, they're seen as quietly competing for economic and diplomatic leadership. Their interests don't fully align, even in Arctic development. China is actively seeking to participate in Arctic navigation and resource development, but Russia regards the Arctic as a strategic area directly linked to its national security and is not willing to easily give up control. There is also analysis that the two countries differ on how much advanced military technology Russia will share with China. Taking all these points into consideration, the relationship between the two countries is evaluated as being driven more by practical interests, cooperating when necessary, and keeping each other in check when needed, rather than being an alliance based on ideology or trust.